In our previous video, we reached a point where we were fairly confident with the phasing on the daily chart of the euro to US dollar. I'm now going to open a 4-hour chart of the euro to US dollar. Again, I go to add new chart to workspace, MetaTrader 4. I choose the 4-hour resolution data, and you'll notice that I have data going all the way back to June of 2009. That's good enough for now, so I click on the OK button. The trading settings are the same as the previous chart that was opened in this workspace, so I know that they are fine for the euro to US dollar. Now, the whole point, as I mentioned at the end of the previous video about intraday work in Sentient Trader, is that you start with the big picture and you then work down into finer and finer detail. And you do this by using a process called inheriting phasing analysis. What that means is that this chart, the 4-hour chart, will inherit its phasing analysis, in other words, the cycles that have been found in the data, from the longer term chart, so from the daily chart. Let's have a look at our daily chart and see what we are dealing with here. I'm going to zoom out again, and here we have an analysis that goes back to 2006 or 2007, and we have two troughs of the 18-month cycle. Now, when I'm looking at more detail, I'm not particularly worried about what happened before the most recent 18-month cycle. What I'm interested in is refining the analysis since the most recent 18-month cycle. Now, the most recent 18-month cycle occurred on the 7th of June, according to this analysis, and so on the 4-hour chart, I'm only really interested in an analysis since the 7th of June. So how do I change that on the chart? Very simple. I find the 7th of June on the chart. Here it is. It's this very prominent trough here, of course. And I'm going to set the start of the analysis period to a little bit before that. In this case, that's about 1950, bar number 1950. So I go to analysis period, and I change the start of the analysis period to bar 1950. There you go. You can see Sentient Trader grays out the bars that are not being analyzed. We can zoom in. There is the period that we are going to be analyzing. And now I'm going to select in Analysis menu and then Inherit Phasing and then Euro to US dollar. That tells Sentient Trader to inherit the phasing from the Euro to US dollar daily chart. And then I click on the Analyze button. And you'll see that Sentient Trader performs an analysis. It performs an analysis very quickly. And here we can see the analysis. And as you can see, the 18-month cycle trough is also marked on the 7th of June. And the 20-week cycle, as occurred in the daily chart, occurs here in early September, on the 10th of September. So you can see that the phasing analysis between the two charts matches. Here we have the daily chart with the 18-month trough and the 20-week trough, and here we have the 4-hour analysis with the 18-month trough and the 20-week trough. So far, so good. Notice that if we look at the very recent analysis since the 20-week trough, you'll notice that Sentient Trader is expecting a 40-week trough to have occurred somewhere over here. It's quite possible that that might be the 40-week trough. But let's move on and have a look at the next chart in our series, which will of course be the 1-hour chart. What is the rule of thumb? The rule of thumb in terms of creating charts for an intraday analysis is that the ratio in terms of time between each chart should be between 3 and 6. So when we are inheriting the analysis from a 4-hour chart, we are looking for a chart that has a time ratio between 3 and 6. In other words, a 1/3 to 1/6 of the time span of the 4-hour chart, and that is, of course, in this case, the hourly chart, the 1-hour chart over there. Now, how much do I want to load of the hourly chart? I've got data going all the way back to February of 2010. Of course, I only want to inherit the phasing going back to the 18-month trough that we discovered in June. Now, June is about 4 months ago. So how many hours is that? Well, it's somewhere around 2,000 hours. So instead of loading all this data, which puts a bit of a load onto Sentient Trader, I'm going to load up 2,500 bars, for instance, 2,500 records. And I'm going to say, OK, to that. The settings are the same as they were for the previous chart. There's no need to change that. And here you can see I've loaded enough data going back to a little bit before the 7th of June. If I wanted to split hairs, I could set the analysis period to roughly about 250, although that's probably not really necessary, but let's do things correctly. And then we can zoom in, and there you can see the data. Now, I am going to inherit the analysis from the 4-hour chart. This process, hopefully, you are getting used to. You click on the analysis menu, and then inherit phasing, and then the 4-hour chart, which is the chart that we're inheriting the phasing analysis from, and I click on start the analysis. Now you'll notice that this analysis is taking a little bit longer than the analysis that happened on the other charts. You can have it, if you have a look here, you can see that Sentient Trader has already stored 27 pieces of price information in the buffer, and we'll notice that slowly going up as time passes. 29 pieces of information, 31 pieces, and you'll notice that the amount of time that it has taken to analyze this chart has moved up to 1%. The big question is, why is this chart taking a long time to analyze? Now, the reasons why a chart will take a long time to analyze in Sentient Trader are many, but to sum them all up, the basic reason why a chart will take a long time to analyze is because there are very many options that Sentient Trader needs to consider, and it is trying to choose the best option out of many available. So I can tell you that the reason why that is happening here, and as you become an experienced user of Sentient Trader, you will be able to spot these moments yourself, that in this case this is happening because here we have a very steady, smooth run up with several troughs that could each be fairly prominent. You'll know from the analysis on the 4-hour chart that Sentient Trader is expecting a 40-day trough to have happened somewhere around about here. Now let's compare this trough to this trough to this trough. Which of these troughs is more likely to be the 40-day trough? Well, that's a rather complicated question. And the reason that it's so complicated is because these troughs are really very similar. They're almost identical patterns that are generating each of those troughs. And there's very little to choose from between those two troughs. So what is happening with Sentient Trader is that it is considering very many options, and it is having to go into a lot of detail to resolve which of these troughs is more likely to be the correct trough. Now, this is an indication that, in fact, you as the user need to step in and you need to exert your more advanced human brain. That is very easy to do. And you will do it by creating an expert model. Now, I know that whenever I mention an expert model, many people feel cold shivers because the sound of an expert model, it sounds very complicated. In fact, it's not. If you're going to be performing intraday analysis with Sentient Trader on a regular basis, you need to get used to the concept of expert models. You need to get used to how they work and how to build them. I'm going to be demonstrating in a moment the process. It is really very simple. Now, you will notice that Sentient Trader is providing us with some information here about what it is busy doing. It is building a recent model from a shell. That is, in fact, the last process that it does, and it is a process that Sentient Trader performs to resolve the most recent phasing analysis. You'll see that it is building the second out of 3 models. It is working on the 6th out of 6 possible cycles, and it is building the 10th out of 10 possible models. However, it is taking a long time. You'll notice that there are now 104 pieces of price information in the buffer, and you'll notice that the percentage figure in brackets is currently standing at 7%. That means that it is taking 7% of 1 bar to perform this analysis. It's not a disaster to be taking 7 or 8% or 10% or even 20% to perform an analysis. However, there is cause for concern in terms of what has been happening here. So now Sentient Trader has finished the analysis, and you'll see that that figure is 8%, which means that it is taking 8% of 1 hour. And if we have a look at the analysis, you can see that it has resolved to position the 40-day trough at this position over here. But the fact that it takes so long in performing this analysis is an indication that we need to step in and provide some extra information using our more advanced brains. Let's take a look at this analysis. Alright, first of all, Sentient Trader has trimmed the start of the analysis period because of the number of bars in this chart, and because it is inheriting the analysis, it doesn't need to go all that far back. So it does that to speed up the analysis a little bit. However, the analysis that is presented is the analysis that was inherited from the 4-hour chart. Let's zoom in here and have a look. And the first thing you will notice immediately is the sure telltale sign that there is a problem with the analysis, and that is this inverted bear. It is as we get into more and more detail that we begin to discover some of the flaws in the analysis. Here you will see an inverted bear which occurred between these two dates that I will zoom in on. And within that inverted bear, there is yet another inverted bear. So here we have two inverted bears at the 40-day and 20-day cycle levels. How can we resolve that? Well, let's go back to our daily chart, because this period that we're speaking about here is, in fact, if we zoom in, this period over here. Now you'll notice that on the daily chart it is a little difficult to say whether this trough over here is in fact the more prominent trough, or whether this trough over here is the more prominent trough. I mentioned previously that if we take a look at the analysis since the most recent 18-month trough, that the positioning of the 20-week trough over here is fairly questionable. Let's measure that again. Sentient Trader has positioned the 20-week cycle trough over here because there are 95 days that have elapsed since the most recent 18-month cycle. So it is saying that this is in fact a short and a very quick 20-week cycle. It is also possible that in fact this trough over here is a trough of the 80-day cycle, as opposed to this trough over here being a trough of the 20-week cycle. Both are perfectly possible. The 20-week cycle is perfectly possible. And the reason why Sentient Trader has positioned the 20-week cycle over here is not only because of the 95 days since the most recent 18-month trough, but also because of the very strong price move that has followed it. So it is perfectly possible that the 20-week cycle might have experienced a trough over here. But let's experiment, and let's tell Sentient Trader to position a trough of the 80-day cycle over here. And let's see what that does to our analysis.